This girl brutally murdered her mother, and not one person in the victim's family wanted her punished for it. On this episode of What the Fuck, Ohio, we're looking into Sidney Powell. And this is one of those cases where nobody really wins, and it really begs the question, is it justice when the victim's family do not agree with the outcome of the case? I don't know, but let's get into it. Sidney Powell was born March 21st, 2000 to parents Brenda Powell and Steve Powell, who I will show you later. She also had a brother. So Sidney had a great childhood, like a really, really great childhood, one that any child would dream of. She had two parents who were still married. They were very loving towards each other and towards their children, and they would do anything to support their children. I know in a lot of these murder cases, we talk about how the perpetrator has this horrible childhood or this trauma in their past. Unfortunately, that does not seem to be the case here. She was extremely close with her family, particularly her mother. They were reported to be best friends. That was Sidney's biggest confidant, and they were just extremely close, more close than a typical mother-daughter bond. Brenda, by all accounts, was just an amazing person and an amazing mother. She actually worked at the Akron's Children's Hospital in the pediatric oncology unit. So she worked with children at their most vulnerable points and was said to just bring smiles. All of her coworkers loved her. Everyone around her just really, truly loved her. Sidney as well has been described as extremely charismatic, extremely bubbly and kind, and never really had any troubles with her parents. She was gifted academically and actually got a partial scholarship to Mount Union College, which she accepted. And it just really seemed like Sidney was starting her life. Things were going great. It seemed like she had the recipe for success. She got the partial scholarship, and then her parents actually agreed to pay for the rest of her tuition. She was living on campus, and as far as her parents knew, everything was going great. Unfortunately, Sidney was keeping a lot of things from her family. Things were not going great in college. Sidney made it through her first year of college, but her second year of college, almost immediately, she started failing her classes. She was originally put on academic probation and then later suspended. Do you think she told anybody? No. She continued to live on campus in the residential hall. She lied to her friends and her roommates and would pretend to go to class. She also never mentioned anything to her parents, and this continued for months before the dean finally caught wind, like, wait a second, she don't even go here, like, you don't go here, and they told her to leave. So the school attempted to kick her out 3 times, but each time she stayed past the deadline, and finally on the 3rd time, they were like, listen, we're about to call your parents to have you removed. And she was like, all right, I'll leave. Do you think she went home? No, she did not go home. She started staying in hotels. She was staying in a hotel. She was starting to run out of money, but she was really just trying to keep up this facade that she is still going to school. Everything is okay in her life, even though it is clearly things are not okay. On March 3rd, 2020, Sidney's father, Steve Powell, realized that he hadn't paid Sidney's tuition in a couple months. So he decided to get in the login portal to pay her tuition. And he realized that he was unable to log in. And he's like, what the hell? He tried to reset his password. He tried to re-download the app, and nothing was working. So he actually contacted Mount Union College. So when he was talking to Mount Union College, they actually informed him that Sidney was no longer enrolled in their school. And clearly he was shocked because this is the first he had ever heard of such a thing. So he was like, okay, what the fuck? And he decided to get on his Life 360 app, and he actually saw that Sidney was at his house. So he left his phone at work so that she could not track him, and he went to the house to confront her. So he goes to the house and confronts Sidney, and she kind of tells him like the half-truth. She said it's only been a couple weeks, although it has been months at this point that she has not been in college. And she doesn't tell him that she's been kicked out of the residential hall, but he is being very supportive. He's like, don't worry, like, we're gonna fix this, it's okay. And she was apparently really concerned that all of her friends had their shit together and she didn't. And he assured her everybody feels like this at some point in your life, and was just trying to be a really supportive father. He did, however, tell her she she needed to tell Brenda. So he called Brenda, and Brenda was like, okay, I'm going to leave work and come home. And Steve was like, all right, Sydney, your mother's on her way home. I'm going to go back to work. And Steve left before Brenda got back to the house. So we're not exactly sure what conversation she had with Sydney when she got home, but eventually she did decide to call the college herself. And she was on the phone with the dean of students and some other staff members when the call was suddenly interrupted by a series of thuds and a loud scream before the call hung up. What they were hearing on that phone was Sydney attacking her mother. So while her mother was still on the phone with the college, she began repeatedly beating her in the face and head with a cast iron skillet. She then went and grabbed a knife from the kitchen and began stabbing her mother in the neck until her mother was eventually dead. So obviously the dean of students and the other staff members at Mountain Union who heard this were a little bit alarmed. So they attempted to call back, and they called back twice with no answer. And on the third call back, a very calm voice answered and said, "Hello, this is Brenda." And immediately the dean of students recognized it was Sydney's voice and confronted her like, "Sydney, is this you?" And she hung up. This really concerned them, so they actually decided to call the Akron Police Department. So the Akron Police Department was dispatched for a welfare check at the Powell residence. And Steve Powell actually had a longtime friend who worked for the Akron Police Force and recognized his address come across the radio. So he contacted Steve. So Steve gets a call from his friend at the police force basically saying there's been a welfare check dispatched to your house. So Steve's obviously like, what the fuck? So he begins trying to call Brenda. No answer. He then calls Sydney. Sydney answers the phone, again, very calmly, and Steve's like, "Where's your mother?" Sydney says, "Oh, Mom's on the phone with Mount Union right now." Steve's like, "Well, the cops are on the way to the house." This is when Sydney completely starts freaking out and is like, someone broke in, and then hangs up the phone on her father. So Steve rushes home, but the police get there first. And when the police get there, they find a screaming Sydney completely covered in blood. And she's screaming to them that the back window is broken, someone broke in, someone attacked my mother, I don't know what happened. And then she pretty much goes completely catatonic. And when I mean catatonic. She is laying on the concrete, like scratching the concrete, banging her head against it, and her eyes are just like wide as saucers. But this is after she already very, you could interpret it. It was very clear, said that someone broke into her house. So they end up taking Sydney to the hospital, and she is then placed in a psychiatric hold. So the police obviously find Brenda's body and realize that this is a brutal murder, like something very, very tragic happened here. And they're looking at the window that Sydney said had been broke, and they realize the window was broke, but it wasn't broke big enough for someone to be able to come through it. It didn't seem like there were any signs of forced entry, and they started to kind of realize that Sydney might have done this. The police continue to investigate, and they realize there is absolutely no evidence of someone else coming into that home, and they arrest and charge Sydney Powell with murder. This is completely against her family's wishes, including Brenda's own mother, who is not wanting any charges or this to be criminally prosecuted at all. They basically just want to let this whole thing go. So Sydney's arrested, and in the jail, she is placed in the psychiatric unit where she is diagnosed with schizophrenia, which I will say is common for her age at the time of the crime. I believe she was 19. That is a common time when schizophrenia will rear its ugly head. And they placed her on medication, and she eventually became stable enough to be released from the psychiatric hold, and her family bonded her out. So while she was out on bond, she lived with Brenda's mother. So it would be her maternal grandmother, which I thought was crazy that they trusted her so much and really felt like she just had a psychotic break in the moment that they would allow her to live with them when she just killed their daughter. So she went to live with her grandmother on her grandmother's horse farm. And meanwhile, her family, including her grandmother, her father, everyone is pleading to have this case dismissed. They want this completely dismissed. They said that they will take care of her psychiatric needs and they will get her the help she needs, but they do not want this prosecuted criminally at all. Okay, I know y'all hate when I do this, but it's 9.5 minutes now. I can only film a 10-minute video, so you're going to have to come back for part 2, but I'm filming it and posting it immediately, so you're not going to have to wait long.